Hey guys, what's up? Tom here with another episode of Fountainhead's Jukebox. And I am fully aware that today I'm probably preaching to the choir a bit because the band is something that most of you will be familiar with, and it's Nevermore, and the album is The Politics of Ecstasy. So The Politics of Ecstasy to me occupies a very interesting and unique space because I discovered Nevermore with this album, especially with the opening track, The Seven Tongues of God, which I heard first. And it came to me at a time where I was just getting into death metal and extreme metal in general. But I was still on the fence about extreme vocals. And so I started to enjoy a lot of heavier bands, and a lot of the virtuoso musicianship and guitar playing really spoke to me. But I really couldn't get into a lot of heavier bands for the vocals at that time still. And here came along Nevermore, which had a really intense, super heavy sound, almost death metal-ish for the time. And the super virtuoso guitar playing by Jeff Loomis obviously was a big part of the appeal. But then they still had melodic vocals, but their melodic vocals were not power metal, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest vocals. They were really completely their own thing. And to this day, I cannot remember any band sounding like, even remotely like Nevermore did in that, space and time in the mid 90s and late 90s. And I keep coming back to this album more than I do for the later albums, which is interesting. And if I remember how that happened, I remember that I did hear The Politics of Ecstasy at a certain time in the late 90s, shortly before they released Dead Heart in the Dead World. And that album, when it came out, I think I bought it on the day of release, and everybody was listening to it. Like in my entire circle of friends, my metal fan buddies, as well as my musician buddies, even the jazz guys, like everybody was really into this album and having their minds blown. And everybody felt at that time that this is the next thing, that's the next level. The guitar playing, the 7-string riffing, the production, the Andy Sneap, type of production, which I had not heard at all prior to this album. That really came together in such a perfect storm that it just blew everybody away at that time. At least in my world, it did. And but now in hindsight, the interesting thing is that this Andy Sneap production style went on to conquer the metal world in the years past that. And it has evolved quite a bit, and it's become kind of a mainstay in the metal community. And now Dead Heart in the Dead World and the albums after that sound comparatively tame to what we have as the standard of metal music right now. And I don't think they've aged nearly as well as The Politics of Ecstasy has, because this is an album that they did before that. It doesn't have the 7-string guitar yet. It doesn't have the craziest technical riffing that they ever did. It doesn't have Jeff's most crazy, arpeggio shred guitar things. It doesn't have the sing-along ballad. It doesn't have the big, huge modern production. Not at all. It's a raw document of 4 people playing together. The Nevermore sound on that album is really not a particular trick, but it's just the style and the personality of those 4 people coming together to create this music. And it's really an example of a band where the band's sound is so much bigger than the sum of its parts. And that's a huge compliment for me, for any band. And I think that's why this album is a lot more timeless than some of the later albums, even though I still love the songs and the playing on those. But this album has a very particular space in the Nevermore discography, and I think in the discography of everybody involved. It was produced by Neil Kernan, who I also had on my radar at that time from bands like Fate's Warning and Spiral Architect, so more of the proggy stuff. And the production's comparatively raw, so there's no drum replacement as far as I can tell. There's no quantization, certainly no auto-tune, and it's all a lot more raw and human and vulnerable in a way. And the result of that, though, is that the band sounds extremely intense. You can just draw a comparison to a train that's running like at full speed, almost ready to derail. So they have that frantic intensity at times, but then also it's very virtuoso in a way that you have these amazing guitar solos, and all the riffs are really the work of a master craftsman. And then you have Warrell's vocals on top, which are unique in every sense of the word, like his intonation, his way of phrasing melodies, his way of working with Jeff's really a lot of times very dissonant chord ideas. It just again, like, this is the sound of a unique band of unique individuals coming together, and the end result is bigger than the sum of the individual parts. And if there's any reason for me doing this video, more so than just singing the general praise of this band, it's that I think this album has something that a lot of other metal music lacks. And I think it's this intense focus on the themes and the ideas behind the album, and its confrontational nature that is really important still. To make a broader point, I think a lot of metal music, and I love metal music, I'm a total metal guy. I grew up with metal. It's been, something that's been a part of my life ever since I was a kid. And on the other hand, I feel that a lot of metal music is very escapist in nature. So a lot of it is no matter if it's really dark and intense or like airy, fairy, fantasy power metal, it's always this escapism, and it's always very blatantly entertaining. I mean, you kind of have to ask yourself where art is supposed to be. Is it to be entertainment, distraction from everyday life, or is it to be something that holds up a mirror to society and just maybe exposes uncomfortable truth and makes you broaden your horizon, and maybe tips you off to themes and ideas that you haven't noticed before. And the Politics of Ecstasy definitely falls into the later category. And I think that's so important. And the themes that they tackle on this album are really still important and still urgent. And urgent is a good word, because there's such an urgency and intensity to the way that Nevermore deliver these songs and ideas on this album that is unparalleled, I think. So there's parts on this album where, even though it doesn't necessarily have the best, whatever that may mean, vocal performance that by Warrell Dane ever, there are parts on this album where he's delivering the lyrics in such an intense way that you can hear him almost tear up, or sometimes it sounds like he's barely able to complete the vocal take because it's so intensely delivered. Right? You can tell that these things are important to him, and that he's really passionate about making a case for these themes to the listener. And I can very well imagine people sitting at home, having bought the album, studying, reading the lyrics, and just having these light bulbs go up on top of their heads, saying, wow, I've never really thought about that. Like, is this a real thing? I have to look into this. And that was definitely the case for me. A lot of these things I had no idea were real issues, like, for example, the Tiananmen Square massacre. That is something I learned about through this album. And then other themes on this album are also, I think, really important, like, for example, the instrumentalization and weaponization of psychedelic drugs, or the erosion of our civil rights, and so on and so forth, like these kind of themes. And I think a lot of times metal musicians pride themselves of being really, woke and really, in tune with the world and being underdogs and rebels and, so much smarter than the average Joe, if you will. But then a lot of metal music, even though it may be super virtuoso and well played, is not daring enough to go there. It's not daring enough to be confrontational in this way. Like even a band like Cannibal Corpse, I mean, come on, it's all, nothing against these guys. I love Cannibal Corpse, I love the guys, but it's childish entertainment. It's a distraction. It's a fantasy world. It's about dismembering female genitalia. I mean, really. I'm not taking anything away from that. I don't say that metal music has to be one certain way and one certain way only. But comparatively, I think this is an album that is really important in the way that it opened a lot of people's ears and minds for very important issues. And it takes a lot more balls to go on stage and sing about these types of themes and to make yourself vulnerable to people who not disagree with you, then it does take balls to go out on stage and sing about, I don't know, splatter lyrics or something, because then you may be confrontational in a way that your grandma may be offended, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really not a confrontational and risky thing to do, because you're just providing entertainment. But this album is more than entertainment, it's a statement. And a comparison that I like to make is Devin Townsend, right? Totally different artist, totally different musical concept, but the way that he in the last couple of years has been more and more controversial and confrontational in presenting his ideas and his themes and his values, his very, you could say, hippie-ish idea of love, peace and unity. But having this guy play on a festival stage, play a song like Grace with its chorus going, live, learn, love, grace, and then tens of thousands of people just, moshing to that. I think that's really important, because it's so easy to be against something, to be cynical and to point the finger at others, while not making yourself vulnerable in any way. And it's so much harder to be that guy going out on stage and delivering something that stands for something, that makes you subject to criticism, to people who don't agree and who don't share these values and ideas and views. And there is the comparison here, because this is a point in time where Nevermore also were a very political band, where they were really standing for something. And I can imagine that closed a lot of doors for them in the music industry, but they did it anyway. And that's one of the biggest compliments I can give them. This, on top of being an amazing band of amazing musicians who created a unique musical style that has not, to my knowledge, been imitated at all. And creating this amazingly gripping and confrontational album. They were also a very influential band in the way that they opened a lot of people's minds to, certain ideas and themes. And what can I say? Like, I salute these guys to the highest degree. And Warrell Dane, wherever you may be, we miss you. Rest in peace. And that's it for today. Bye-bye.